They said the fires of San Miguel burned for 3 days, but no one ever found the bodies. Only the scent of iron and salt lingered, clinging to the wind that rolled in from the sea. They whispered that Esperanza de Lima never screamed when they came for her, that she only smiled, her hands still warm with soot. Before we continue, take a breath. The past is closer than you think. Subscribe to remember what others forgot. In the coastal province of Piura, where the red earth met the sea like a blood pact, the name Esperanza had once meant mercy. But by the winter of 1816, it meant something else entirely: retribution. The plantations of the north trembled under the shadow of her name, and even the old bells of the mission seemed to hesitate before they tolled. She had been born in the barracks of San Cristobal, daughter to a Spanish overseer and a native woman who died before her first memory. The midwife swore the child was silent at birth, but when the priest touched her brow with oil, Esperanza had opened her eyes, black as the coal she would one day use to burn 17 men alive. At 15 she was brought to the estate of Don Ignacio Velarde, a man known for his white gloves and crimson temper. He owned 500 acres of sugarcane and 112 souls who harvested it. Esperanza was given to the house, trained to lace corsets and pour wine, to silence her steps and bow her gaze. But even then she carried something in her eyes that unsettled those who looked too long, a stillness too perfect, like water before a storm. The Velarde plantation was a monument of cruelty dressed as order. The nights were punctured by screams that blended with the sound of cicadas. Men were whipped, women taken, and the overseer's whip was said to sing like a violin when wet with blood. Yet Esperanza was never touched. Perhaps it was her quiet defiance, or perhaps Don Ignacio saw something in her that reminded him of his own sins. She would walk through the corridors after midnight, carrying a single candle, her shadow long against the walls. The servants said they heard her humming old songs in Quechua, songs her mother might have sung before dying of fever. One by one the others began to vanish. A boy found floating in the irrigation canal, eyes open as if still watching the stars. A cook's daughter, gone after the sound of weeping echoed through the kitchens. But no one spoke of it in daylight. No one dared. Don Ignacio's wife, Señora Adela, wrote in her diary that she dreamed of flames licking the windows of the main house, of a woman in white standing before them, her face calm, her eyes endless. The diary would later be found half-burned, the ink melted into the paper like tears. But before the fire, before the night of the furnace, there was still the illusion of peace. The sugarcane grew high, and the sea glittered in the distance. The masters dined beneath chandeliers imported from Cadiz, and the servants bowed until their backs became part of the soil. It was during the feast of St. Anthony that the first omen arrived. A black horse, unclaimed and untamed, wandered into the fields at dusk. Its eyes glowed like embers, and when it breathed, the air smelled faintly of sulfur. No one dared touch it, not even the stable boys. By morning it was gone, but the tracks it left behind led straight to the coal furnace by the mill. That same night, Esperanza was seen standing beside the furnace, her face illuminated by the red light inside. A guard swore he saw her whispering into the fire as though speaking to something, or someone beyond. When he confronted her, she simply turned, placed a finger to her lips, and walked away. The days that followed were heavy with silence. The sea grew restless, tides rising higher than ever before. Birds abandoned their nests near the plantation. Even the overseers began to whisper of omens. The Virgin statue had wept in the chapel, and salt had appeared in the drinking wells. Esperanza moved through it all like a phantom. She cared for the injured, washed the blood from the walls, tended to the dying. No one suspected her because she had become indispensable. The perfect servant. The perfect shadow. But beneath her calm lay a furnace of her own. Years ago, she had watched her mother die from the lashes of Don Ignacio's whip. She had seen her brother sold to another plantation, never to return. She had swallowed every injustice, every scream, until her silence became its own weapon. And now the time had come. In the final days before the fire, Don Ignacio held a gathering for the plantation owners of the region. 17 men, each one guilty of the same sin, each one believing the world had been built for their pleasure and the suffering of others. The dinner was grand, their laughter loud enough to drown out the moans from the slave quarters. Esperanza served them wine with a calm hand and a faint smile. They said the night air smelled strange that evening, something sharp, metallic. The dogs would not stop barking. And Esperanza, ever silent, kept glancing toward the window, where the reflection of the coal furnace flickered like a heartbeat. By the time the clock struck midnight, the guests were drunk, the lamps burned low, and the sound of rain began to fall against the glass. Only later would they realize it wasn't rain, It was ash. That was the night San Miguel began to burn. And in the faint light before dawn, a witness claimed to see her standing in the smoke, her dress white as bone, her hands black with soot. When asked what she had done, Esperanza de Lima only whispered, "I returned the heat they gave." The wind carried her words across the hills, through the sugar fields into the towns beyond, where even now, 2 centuries later, the locals say that when the night grows too quiet, you can hear the echo of her furnace still breathing. The fires of San Miguel did not begin all at once. They started quietly, like a secret shared between wind and ember. First it was the mill, an explosion of light in the distance, a tremor felt beneath bare feet. Then the stables, then the drying sheds. By dawn, 17 men who had once ruled the valley of Piura had vanished into the coal furnace Esperanza de Lima had watched for years in silence. But before anyone could understand the horror of that night, the estate had already dissolved into smoke and rumor. The fire devoured everything except the stone foundations and the charred skeleton of the chapel cross, which now leaned toward the earth as though in mourning. The soldiers arrived days later, finding the place deserted. The air reeked of iron and ash. Horses lay collapsed beside the troughs, their flesh marked by burns too deliberate to be called accident. And in the ashes near the furnace, someone had drawn a symbol, 2 hands meeting over a flame. None of the men recognized it, but the oldest among them muttered a prayer and refused to look again. Esperanza was gone. In the neighboring town of Cadaqueos, the priest spoke her name in whispers. The nuns said her ghost had been seen walking the cliffs, her eyes glowing like coals, her hair streaked with soot. A fisherman claimed he saw her reflection in the river, not her body, only her reflection, walking where the water ran deepest. But within the city of Piura itself, the matter was treated differently. The governor declared the incident a revolt. Pamphlets were printed calling her La Furia del Valle, the fury of the valley. To the planters she was a monster. To the enslaved she was a miracle. And yet no one had truly seen what happened that night. A single survivor was found, Don Ignacio's youngest son, Rafael Velarde. His body was burned but alive, his eyes wide with terror. He refused to speak for 3 days, clutching a silver rosary so tightly that it left the shape of the crucifix burned into his palm. When at last he did speak, his words were feverish, half prayer, half confession. He said the fire had begun inside the furnace, but there had been no one tending it. He said the coal had turned white, not red, and that from the flames a woman had stepped forward, barefoot, her dress untouched by ash. He said she spoke his father's name, and the fire followed her hand as she pointed toward each man seated at the table. They screamed, he whispered, but the sound never left the walls. It was like the air swallowed their voices. When asked what happened next, Raphael began to laugh. It was a strange, hollow laugh that made the room colder. She looked at me, he said, and she smiled. She said, "You are the last to see the truth." He never spoke again. Weeks passed and the sugar fields of San Miguel remained barren, the soil blackened and dead. Crows gathered by the hundreds, feeding on nothing, circling endlessly. At night, a dull orange glow was sometimes seen on the horizon, as if the fires beneath the earth refused to die. The investigators sent by the Crown found strange inconsistencies. The furnace, though scorched, showed no sign of explosion or collapse. The chains used to bind the laborers were found melted into perfect circles, as if released by invisible hands. And deep within the ash, bones were discovered, not 17 but 18 sets. One too many. Among them was a small skeleton wearing the rusted clasp of a rosary identical to Rafael Velarde's. The investigators sealed their notes and left before sunset. None of them ever returned to San Miguel. But the story did not die. It grew. In the town's taverns, travelers spoke of a woman in white walking through the ruins, her skin glimmering faintly as if lit from within. Sailors swore her reflection appeared on the surface of their rum bottles. A beggar claimed she visited him in a dream, asking for a match. "To finish what I started," she had said. The church, desperate to quell the fear, declared her deeds heretical, a pact with Satan, they said. A witch's vengeance. They sent Father Celestino to bless the grounds and offer a final prayer. He returned pale and trembling, his sermon that Sunday delivered with shaking hands. "Some souls," he said, "burn so bright that even heaven turns away." He never spoke her name again. By the year's end, the valley had become a ghost region. No one harvested the cane, no one dared rebuild. The soil refused to grow, and the few who passed by reported hearing whispers rising from the ground when the wind blew from the sea. 17, 17. And then one night the whispers changed. In December, during a coastal storm, A distant light was seen flickering once more at the ruins of San Miguel. The fishermen said it wasn't lightning, it was the color of a furnace, deep and red. Those who were brave enough to look closer claimed to see movement, shadows pacing before the burnt chapel, the faint glint of a woman's hair catching the firelight. When morning came, they found new footprints in the ash. Barefoot, small, leading toward the sea. Rumors spread that Esperanza had returned to claim what remained of the Velarde lineage. 3 of Don Ignacio's surviving relatives were found dead within a fortnight. 1 drowned, 1 burned in his carriage, and 1 found buried up to his neck in salt. None could prove connection, but every whisper pointed to the same ghost, the same impossible name. And so, fear turned to faith. Women began to pray to her in secret. They left offerings, coal, candles, and sprigs of sugar cane by the edge of the blackened field. Children were told never to step on the soil where her furnace once stood, or they would hear her heartbeat beneath the earth. Esperanza had become more than a name. She was a story. A warning. A prayer whispered by the oppressed and cursed alike. But history, as it often does, was rewritten. The colonial archives marked her as an outlaw. Her existence was reduced to 2 lines in a ledger. Esperanza de Lima. Mixed blood. Executed in absentia for the murder of 17 men. Yet no record of her death was ever found. And in the centuries that followed, the legend grew restless again. Farmers said that every time a new plantation was built upon those ashes, fire would take it before harvest. The rivers nearby ran red during the dry months, as though remembering what they once reflected. And when travelers stopped by the ruins at night, they claimed to hear the crackle of coal, the hiss of burning sugar, and a woman's voice whispering softly, almost tenderly, "The furnace is never cold." There are nights when the valley of Pura still trembles without wind. When the soil, even after centuries, exhales heat from beneath the blackened earth, as though something still breathes below. On such nights, those who live near the ruins say you can hear it, a slow rhythmic thud, like the pulse of a heart encased in stone. No one knows where the first sound came from, but by 1816, before the fires, there had been signs. Before Esperanza de Lima was the fury of the valley, she had been the housekeeper of the Velarde estate. They called her, the Quiet One. She was neither slave nor free, a child of the in-between, born to an enslaved woman and a Spanish overseer who never acknowledged her blood. Her skin marked her as less than human, yet her eyes frightened the men who ordered her about. She never raised her voice, but her silence had weight, and the air seemed to move differently around her. At 17, she was assigned to the sugar rooms, where the men stoked the great coal furnace to boil the cane juice. It was said she could stand beside the fire for hours without sweating. They laughed and called her Fire's Bride. What they did not know was that she had learned to speak to it. The furnace was not just heat and flame. It was memory. It kept the shape of those who fed it, the sweat of the workers, the ashes of those who died beside it. And Esperanza listened. She began to write by candlelight, secret words in a language older than the plantations. Her mother had taught her some of it, whispered during the rare nights when the masters slept. Words from the coast of Angola, twisted through generations but still powerful. Kalunda, Lumba, Soki. Each syllable a link in the chain between the living and the dead. She kept those words hidden beneath a loose floorboard, wrapped in linen stained with soot. Don Ignacio Velarde, the master of San Miguel, was a man of immense wealth and cruelty. His fortune was built not only on the backs of others but on the bones of those who had dared to flee his estate. His pride was the furnace, a structure so vast it glowed for miles at night, turning coal and sugar into gold. He took special interest in Esperanza, though not for her skill. Her silence intrigued him, her calm defiance infuriated him. He would summon her at night under pretense of inspection, speaking to her as though she were furniture. His wife pretended not to see. The servants prayed not to hear. But one evening in late June, something changed. A child was born in the servant quarters, a girl, pale-skinned, with eyes like molten amber. Esperanza never named the father. Don Ignacio's wife died that same month, her body found floating in the irrigation canal, her mouth filled with coal dust. The household said it was coincidence, God's will. But others whispered. Esperanza was taken from the sugar room and locked in the cellar. For days she heard footsteps above her, the sound of chains, of laughter, of her daughter crying. And then silence. When she was released, the cradle was empty. Don Ignacio told her the child had been sent away. No one dared ask where. That night, the furnace stopped burning for the first time in years. The coal refused to catch. The overseers blamed humidity, cursed the weather. Esperanza simply watched. 2 weeks later, strange things began to happen. The livestock refused to eat. The cane juice curdled overnight. Candles burned blue. One of the servants claimed to have seen a figure inside the furnace, watching him through the flames. Don Ignacio accused Esperanza of witchcraft. He dragged her before the men, demanding confession. She said nothing. He struck her. Still she said nothing. Then he took her to the furnace itself, forced her to kneel before it. "If you love your fire so much," he sneered, "let it judge you." He ordered the men to throw her in. They hesitated, some from fear, some from guilt, but obedience outweighed mercy. Esperanza did not scream. She turned her face toward the flame and whispered the words her mother had taught her. Kalunda, Lemba, Soki. The coals stirred, glowed white, then burst outward. The men fled, shouting of devils. The fire spread, consuming the sugar room, the stables, the fields. But when it reached the mansion, it did not burn the walls. It burned the men. Don Ignacio's screams were heard as far as Pura, echoing down the valley like a sermon of judgment. Those who saw the blaze said it looked like a sun had fallen to earth. By dawn the estate was gone. And Esperanza was seen standing amidst the ruins, her hair untouched by flame. In her hands she held a small bundle wrapped in linen. Some said it was her child returned from the dead. Others said it was the parchment of her words, the language that had answered her call. But when the soldiers searched the ashes, nothing was found. Except one thing. In the place where the furnace had stood, there was a hollow space, smooth as glass. And in the center of it lay a single heartbeat, faint but rhythmic, pulsing beneath the ground. When one of the investigators pressed his ear to it, his hair turned white before morning. That was the last time anyone tried to rebuild San Miguel. Over the next decade, every man connected to the Velarde estate met a similar fate: burned, drowned, or found staring into mirrors that had gone black. Some said Esperanza visited them at night. Others said it was her daughter. But all described the same sound before they died: the hiss of burning sugar. The church eventually sealed the valley and declared it cursed. The locals called it La Boca del Fuego, the mouth of fire. Travelers who passed through claimed to see figures moving in the mist, their faces glowing faintly, their mouths open in silent scream. And yet, some nights, when the moon hung low and the tide was still, a figure in white was seen walking the ridge above the ruins. She carried no light, yet the ground glimmered beneath her steps. They said she was looking for something, someone, a name, a voice, a truth the fire had not yet consumed. There are stories that die when their tellers do. And there are stories like Esperanza's, ones that keep breathing through the earth itself. 4 years after the burning of San Miguel, no one dared speak her name aloud. The soldiers who had investigated the fire went missing one by one, their horses found wandering the roads with singed hooves. The church forbade burial rites for the dead plantation owners, and the valley was marked on maps only as Tierra Perdida, lost land. Yet travelers could still see a faint orange shimmer rising from the ground on certain nights, like embers refusing to cool. In 1820, 4 years after the inferno, a wandering priest named Father Rivas arrived in Pura. He had heard rumors of the valley and the woman who commanded fire. He wrote in his journal, "The people fear her as they fear the sun. They speak of her as one speaks of a storm." He meant to perform an exorcism, to lay the restless spirits to rest. But when he entered the valley he found no ghosts. Only silence. The air was still, yet the trees leaned away from a point unseen. The soil was warm underfoot. Rivas felt watched, not by one presence but many. He reached the blackened remains of the furnace and knelt to pray. And there, beneath the windless hush, came a sound like breathing. He uncovered a layer of soot and found an imprint, a woman's hand burned perfectly into stone. At its center, a mark, a circle of glass pulsing faintly with light. He pressed his crucifix to it and the metal hissed. He fled the valley before dusk, abandoning his horse when it refused to move. His journal was found years later in a monastery, its final page scorched and unreadable except for one line: "Hell is not below us. It was built here by men." Time buried San Miguel beneath vines and memory, but legends thrive where fear endures. The valley became a warning to the wealthy: never spill blood upon your own fields, for it will take root. By mid-century, when Peru's revolution loomed, Esperanza's story returned in whispers. Workers claimed to see her walking among the cane fields of other estates, her hands leaving trails of ash where she touched the stalks. Plantation owners began to vanish without trace, their houses found filled with soot though no fire had burned. One evening in 1841, a letter surfaced in Lima. It was addressed to the descendants of the Velarde family, who had fled to the coast. The letter contained no greeting, no signature, only a pressed coal flake and 4 words written in faint brown ink: debt paid in full. The handwriting matched an entry from the San Miguel ledger, last signed by Esperanza de Lima. No one could explain it. No one dared to. But it was enough to send the last of the Velardes across the ocean. Their ship caught fire 3 days out from port. The cause was unknown. The captain's final log noted a woman seen walking on the waves, her reflection burning brighter than the moon. Even now, 2 centuries later, the land remains untouched. The valley is fenced off by the government, its soil tested and retested. No growth will take. A team of archaeologists once tried to excavate the old furnace site in 1973. They found fragments of melted stone and one small object perfectly preserved: a woman's ring fused with a lump of coal. When exposed to sunlight, the coal glowed faintly red. The team sealed their findings and left the next day. The lead archaeologist never spoke again. His notes ended with a single line, trembling and uncertain. She did not burn with them, she burned through them. In nearby villages, old women still tell the tale to their children: how the woman of fire freed the enslaved and cursed the land that fed on suffering. Some say Esperanza was vengeance itself. Others say she became something greater, a guardian spirit watching over those who toil. But the wise tell it differently. They say she waits, still human in her sorrow, still searching for the child stolen from her arms. And if you walk the valley alone at dusk, they say you may hear it, the sound of a lullaby carried on smoke. The words are soft, impossible to understand, yet they stay with you long after. If you follow it, you'll see a figure standing among the ruins, a woman in white, her eyes glowing faintly like embers beneath frost. She doesn't move. She only watches. And if you speak her name, Esperanza de Lima, the ground beneath you will tremble. Just once. Like the heartbeat of something that refuses to die. Because not all fires fade. Some learn to remember. Some learn to wait. If this tale found you tonight, let it rest with a like, and wake again with a subscribe. The past only stays alive when it's remembered. Burned 17 plantation owners alive in a coal furnace, 1816 inch to match this story's atmosphere?